Hello everyone, welcome if you're new and welcome back if you're not. Today we're going to be talking about machine sewing. For all my examples today, I'll be using my Singer Curvy 8763 sewing machine. This machine is perfect for beginner sewers. It does have a few differences from a traditional sewing machine, but I'll make sure to point those out when we get to them. For starters, it has this handy stitch selection that allows you to switch back and forth between stitches very easily and shows pictures of what the stitches look like. Now let's get started labeling the other parts of the machine. This is an example of what a more traditional machine would look like. Now I'll get started showing you all the parts on my machine. To start us off, this is the foot pedal. The pressure on the top of the foot pedal tells the machine when to start sewing. Next up, we have our spool pin and bobbin winder. And don't forget your hand wheel on the side. This allows you to manually draw the needle down and up. Then we have our thread guide. Moving down our machine, we have our thread tension control. Now my machine has a needle threader, but I usually just thread mine by hand. Next up we have our needle. It's held onto the machine by the needle bar. And this is the needle screw, which can be loosened to change out your needle. This metal piece is called the presser foot, and it can be changed or exchanged using the release switch on the back. This is the presser foot lifter. It controls the presser foot. This large metal piece is called the needle plate. The ridged piece in the middle is called the feed dog, and it moves up and down to help scoot your fabric along so that your stitches are even. Finally, we have space for our bobbin, which is the bottom thread in your sewing machine. To begin our threading process, let's start with winding the bobbin. My machine has this handy little illustration that shows how your thread needs to be arranged in order to wind the bobbin. Place your empty bobbin on the spool and then follow the illustration to place your thread. Thread through the bobbin from the bottom so you have your extra thread out the top like this. For my machine, I just slide the whole spool over to the right to let the machine know that we're going to be winding a bobbin. Then simply press the foot pedal down and your bobbin will start to wind. Don't forget to clip your top thread after it's gone through a few revolutions. Then just press your foot pedal down until the bobbin is full. Clip your thread, move your bobbin spool back to the left and remove your bobbin. To thread your bobbin, first remove the plate cover. Make sure when you pull the thread, the bobbin is rotating counterclockwise. Now, hook the thread in the notch at the bottom and bring it around back towards the top of the machine. My machine has a tiny blade at the top, so I just cut my thread on that and replace the plate cover. Now let's thread our top thread. Place your thread spool on the spool pin. Using the thread guide, place your thread along the seam on the front of the machine. On traditional machines, this threading process is usually a lot more complicated, but this one is very simple. Once your thread reaches the bottom of the seam at the front of the machine, I hold mine horizontally and move it through the thread guides at the bottom of the needle bar. The last step is just guiding the thread through the eye of the needle from front to back. To pull up the bottom thread, hold the slack from the top thread in your right hand and do one stitch on your machine. This will pull up the bottom thread. When your threads look like this, that means you're ready to sew. This image shows how the top and bottom thread come together to make your stitches. When you begin any stitch, it's important to do a back stitch. This makes sure the threads won't come unraveled. On my machine, this is a button, but on some it's a lever on the side. Begin your stitch, back stitch 3 or 4 stitches, and then you can continue on with your stitch. Zigzag stitches are important to know because they allow your fabric to stretch more than a regular stitch would. Don't forget to backstitch. The stitch length adjuster determines how long each stitch will be. Here you can see I'm decreasing the stitch length so that the stitches will be shorter. You can see the difference in stitch lengths here. This bottom adjuster determines the stitch width. It's important in zigzag stitches because it determines how far the needle will move from side to side when creating your stitch. For my example here, I kept the stitch length the same and just shortened the width. To finish out this example, I bumped down the stitch width measurement one more time. And this is what we're left with. You can see how the stitch shrinks. Using both the stitch length and width, you can determine the perfect stitch size that will work for your garment. Now let's sew some seams. For a plain seam, get your 2 pieces of fabric and place them right sides together. Then you can pin them. I like to put my pins perpendicular to the way I'll be sewing so that I can just sew right over the top of them. Then line it up on your machine. Today I'm using a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and that measurement is written on my needle plate. Don't forget to backstitch. Then keep the edge of your fabric aligned with the 5/8 mark on your needle plate. This will also help keep your seams straight. Don't forget your backstitch at this end, and then clip your threads. Remove all your pins and open out your seam. Now you're ready for the most important part. I like to use my iron to press out my seams so that they lay flat and pretty. And there you go, a beautiful straight seam. One option to finish off your seam is to top stitch. For this, I sewed 2 straight lines right next to the seam I already made, which keeps my seam nice and flat. Next up, let's talk about gathering. Gathering fabric shortens it, but it also adds texture. For this example, I sewed 3 straight lines with my machine set to the highest stitch length. When gathering, make sure you don't backstitch because you're going to grab the top threads on all 3 seams and pull, which creates this ruffling effect in the fabric. Then just adjust to make sure your gathers are how you want them. For our final set of stitches, I wanted to show off some of the fun decorative stitches that my machine can do. These stitches are fun to use as hems for pants or as decorative top stitches. Thanks for joining me today, and I'm so happy I got to share some of my love for sewing with you.